The fisherman's nets had been torn 3 nights running, and Kellan Foster woke each dawn expecting to find them ruined again. Yet somehow they were always pristine by the time he reached the weathered dock that jutted into the gray waters of Stillmere Bay. The mystery gnawed at him as he stood in the pre-dawn darkness of the 4th morning, his calloused hands running over hemp that should have been shredded by the rocks and current, but instead felt newly woven, the knots tight and expert. He was 32 years old, a widower of 4 years, and in all that time he had learned to trust nothing that seemed too good to be real, because the world had taught him that kindness always came with a price. The wind carried the salt smell of the bay and something else, something musky and unfamiliar that made the hairs on his neck stand up. Kellan had been a soldier once, before an arrow through his thigh had sent him limping home to take up his late father's fishing trade, and that soldier's instinct told him he was being watched. He turned slowly, scanning the dock and the rocky shore beyond, seeing nothing but the dark shapes of storage sheds and overturned boats. The village of Stillmere was still asleep, smoke not yet rising from chimneys, and he was alone with whatever ghost or creature had decided to help him. Or so he thought until he heard the splash. It came from beneath the dock, a careful sound like something trying very hard to be quiet. Kellan crouched, ignoring the familiar ache in his bad leg, and peered between the weathered planks. At first he saw only darkness and the glint of water, but then his eyes adjusted and he made out a shape pressed against one of the support posts. Large, hunched, definitely not human, his hand went to the knife at his belt, soldier's reflexes taking over, but he did not draw it. Whatever was down there had been mending his nets, not stealing from him or threatening him. He had seen orcs before, during his years in the border wars, had fought them and killed them and watched friends die to their axes and arrows. But he had also seen them retreat when given the chance, had watched an orc warrior carry a wounded companion from the field instead of finishing off a human soldier, and that memory had complicated his hatred in ways he still did not fully understand. "I know you are there," he said, keeping his voice low and steady. "I am not going to hurt you." Silence. The water lapped against the posts. "You have been fixing my nets," Kellan continued. "4 nights now." Why, more silence than a shifting sound as the shape moved. He caught a glimpse of green skin, the curve of a muscular shoulder, and then nothing as whatever it was pressed deeper into the shadows. Kellan sat back on his heels, thinking. An orc hiding under his dock in a human village, doing secret kindnesses in the night. That spoke of desperation and danger both. If the villagers found out, there would be torches and pitchforks, maybe worse. The wars might have ended 5 years ago, but the hatred had not, and Stillmere was close enough to the old border that everyone here had lost someone to orc raids. He made a decision that was probably foolish but felt right in his gut. "I am going out to fish now," he said to the shadows under the dock. "I will be gone until midday. There is a shed behind my cottage, the one with the blue door. It has a lock, but I am going to leave it open today. If someone wanted to get out of the cold and the wet, they could hide there. No one would know." He stood, loaded his nets into his small boat, and pushed off without looking back. His hands were steady on the oars, but his mind was racing. What was he doing, offering shelter to an orc? If she was caught on his property, and he was sure it was a she from that brief glimpse of a curved figure, he could be exiled or worse. Harboring the enemy, they would call it. Never mind that there was no war anymore, only the bitter residue of one. But his nets had been mended with a skill that spoke of patience and care. And Kellan Foster had been alone in his cottage for 4 years, speaking to no one but customers, and occasionally the village priest. And something in him was starved for connection, even if it came from the most unlikely source imaginable. The fishing was good that morning, his mended nets bringing in a haul of silvery mackerel that would fetch decent coin at market. He worked mechanically, pulling in fish and resetting lines, but his thoughts were back at the dock. Would she take his offer? Would she be there when he returned? Or would she vanish back into whatever desperate circumstances had brought her to Stillmere? When he rowed back to shore around noon, the dock was empty and undisturbed. He carried his catch up to the village square, sold it to the fishmonger, and bought bread and cheese and dried meat with some of the coin, more than he needed for himself. The fishmonger, a gap-toothed woman named Marta, gave him a curious look but said nothing, and Kellan walked back to his cottage with his provisions and his pounding heart. The cottage sat at the edge of the village, a small stone building with a thatched roof and a garden plot that he barely maintained. The shed behind it was older than the cottage itself, built by his grandfather for storing boat repairs and equipment. The blue paint on its door was flaking and faded. Kellan had left it unlatched that morning, and now he could see that the door was closed but not quite flush with the frame, as if someone had pulled it shut from inside. He did not go directly to the shed. Instead, he went into his cottage, lit the fire, and made himself a simple meal of bread and cheese. He ate slowly, giving her time to decide if she trusted him, then wrapped the dried meat and half the remaining bread in a cloth and carried it outside. "I am leaving food by the door," he called out, not too loudly. "Take it or do not. Your choice." He set the bundle on the ground near the shed entrance and walked away, back into his cottage where he busied himself with mending a shirt and trying not to stare out the window. An hour passed, then another. The sun was starting its descent toward the western hills when he finally looked outside and saw that the bundle was gone. That night he lay awake in his narrow bed, listening to the wind and wondering if she was warm enough in the shed. He had not put blankets there, had not wanted to be too obvious about it, but the spring nights were still cold this far north, and she had been living under a dock for at least 4 days. In the morning he would find a reason to leave a blanket outside, maybe pretend he was airing it out. Sleep came eventually, and with it dreams of green skin and dark eyes watching him from the shadows. He woke to another gray dawn and another perfectly mended net. This time 2 of them had been torn, caught on submerged debris he had not noticed in the previous day's distraction, and both were now flawlessly repaired. Kellan ran his thumb over the new knots and felt something warm unfurl in his chest. She was still here. She had taken his shelter and his food, and she was still here. Over the following days, a strange routine developed. Kellan would fish during the day, sell his catch, and leave food by the shed each evening. The food would be gone by morning, and any torn or damaged nets would be mended. They did not speak. He did not try to open the shed or catch a glimpse of her. It felt important to let her set the pace, to prove he was trustworthy by respecting her space and her fear. But he found himself talking anyway, standing outside the shed after leaving the food, sharing bits of his day like he was speaking to a friend. "Good haul today," he would say. "The mackerel are running thick this season. I remember one year they barely came at all and half the village went hungry." Or, "Old Willem's cow had twins yesterday. He is acting like he personally achieved something remarkable." Or, "I saw a hawk take a fish right out of the water this morning. Beautiful thing. Terrifying but beautiful." He did not know if she listened or if she thought he was mad, talking to a locked shed. But it made him feel less alone, and that was something. 2 weeks passed this way. Kellan's nets were always perfect, his catch was consistently good, and the shed remained closed and mysterious. The villagers noticed he was buying more food than usual, but chalked it up to a man finally taking care of himself after years of grief. Marta the fishmonger even said it was good to see him with some meat on his bones, though Kellan had not gained any weight because he was giving half his meals away. Then came the storm. It rolled in from the sea on a black afternoon, the kind of weather that made every fisherman grateful to be on shore. Rain lashed the village in sheets, and wind tore at roofs and shutters. Kellan sat by his fire, warm and dry, and thought about the shed. It had a good roof. His grandfather had built things to last, but it was still just a shed, and this was a vicious storm. He lasted an hour before his conscience won. He grabbed a spare blanket, wrapped it around his shoulders against the rain, and dashed outside. The wind nearly knocked him over, and the cold rain soaked through his clothes in seconds. He reached the shed and pounded on the door. "It is Kellan," he shouted over the howling wind. "You should come inside. The cottage. This is too much." No response. He tried the door and found it latched from within. "Please," he called. "I swear I will not hurt you. You will freeze out here." Still nothing. He stood there getting pummeled by rain, feeling foolish and worried in equal measure, and was about to give up when he heard the scrape of wood on wood, and the door opened a crack. He could not see much in the darkness and the storm, just a gleam of eyes reflecting the distant cottage firelight. But it was enough. "Come on," he said, gentler now. "Let us get out of this weather." The door opened wider and she emerged, and even hunched against the rain she was tall, nearly his height. She wore rags that might have once been clothes, sodden and clinging to a powerful frame. Her long dark hair was plastered to her skull, and her green skin looked gray in the storm light. She hesitated, clearly torn between the misery of the shed and the danger of trusting him. Kellan made the choice for her. He turned and walked toward his cottage, not looking back, leaving it to her to follow or not. He was halfway to the door when he heard her footsteps splashing behind him, and relief surged through him. Inside, the fire was still burning bright. Kellan shed his soaked blanket and immediately busied himself stoking the flames higher, giving her space and time to adjust. He heard the door close, heard her breathing, harsh and uncertain. "There are dry clothes in the chest by the bed," he said without turning around. "They were my wife's. You are welcome to them." He kept his back turned, giving her privacy, and heard the hesitant sounds of movement. After a few minutes she spoke for the first time, her voice low and rough like she was not used to using it. "Where is your wife?" "Dead," Kellan said simply. "Fever took her 4 years ago." Silence then. "I am sorry." "So am I." He finally turned around and got his first real look at her in the firelight. She was younger than he had expected, maybe 25, with a strong jaw and small tusks that protruded just slightly over her lower lip. Her eyes were dark amber, wary but not cruel, and her hair was drying into thick waves around her pointed ears. She had changed into one of Sarah's old dresses, a simple brown wool thing, and it fit her reasonably well, though it pulled tight across her shoulders. She was watching him like she expected him to lunge at her at any moment. "I am not going to hurt you," Kellan said again. "You have been helping me for weeks. The least I can do is give you a warm place to ride out a storm." "Why?" The word came out sharp, confused. "You are human. I am orc." "Your people hate mine." "Some do," Kellan agreed. "I have reason to myself, but you have been kind to me when you did not have to be. That matters more than what you are." She looked away, her jaw working like she was chewing over his words. "My name is Grisha," she said finally. "Of the Ironhide clan, or I was. I am cast out now." Kellan Foster, fisherman, also somewhat cast out, though in a different way. He moved to the small table and poured 2 cups of weak ale from a jug. "Will you sit?" Grisha eyed the chairs like they might be traps, but eventually she lowered herself into one, moving with a warrior's caution. Kellan sat across from her and pushed one cup in her direction. She took it but did not drink. "Why were you cast out?" he asked. Her fingers tightened on the cup. "I spoke against the clan chief when he wanted to raid human settlements. The war is over. I said we should trade, not kill. He said I had gone soft, that I dishonored the clan. So he cast me out, said if I loved humans so much, I could go live with them." Her laugh was bitter. "But humans do not want orcs either, so I have been hiding, moving village to village, taking what I can." "Why fix my nets then? You could have just stolen food." She met his eyes finally, and he saw pain there and loneliness. "Because I am tired of just surviving. Because you looked sad, standing there every morning looking at your torn nets. Because I know something of work and care, and I wanted to do something that was not just taking." Kellan felt his throat tighten. He understood that feeling, the need to be useful, to matter. "You did good work. Best mending I have ever seen." A small smile tugged at her mouth, and he caught a glimpse of what she might look like without the fear and the exhaustion. "My mother taught me. She said strong hands should know both how to fight and how to fix. Wise woman. She died in the war. Fighting humans." The moment stretched between them, heavy with history and loss. Outside the storm raged on, but inside the cottage was warm and the fire crackled gently. Kellan took a drink of his ale and said, "You can stay here. In the cottage, I mean, not the shed." "Just until you figure out where to go next." Grisha stared at him. "You would do that, risk your place here." "I do not have much of a place to risk. I keep to myself, people mostly leave me alone. As long as you stay inside during the day, no one needs to know. And at night? At night you can do whatever you want. Mend nets. Walk the shore, be free for a few hours." He shrugged. "It is not much of a life, but it is better than a shed." She was quiet for a long time, her amber eyes searching his face for deception or ulterior motive. Whatever she saw there must have satisfied her, because she finally nodded, just a small dip of her chin. "1 week," she said. "Then I will move on. I will not bring trouble to you." "1 week then," Kellan agreed, though something in his chest was already protesting the idea of her leaving. The storm blew itself out by morning, leaving the world washed clean and bright. Kellan woke to find Grisha asleep on the floor by the fire, curled up in the spare blanket he had offered her. She had refused the bed, saying it would not be proper, and he had not argued. He moved quietly, not wanting to wake her, and went out to check his boat and nets. Everything was secure, lashed down against the storm's fury. The bay was choppy but calming, and the morning sun was burning through the last of the clouds. It was going to be a good day for fishing. He was loading his gear when he heard footsteps behind him and turned to see Grisha approaching, still wearing Sarah's old dress, her hair pulled back in a practical braid. "You should not be out here," he said quickly, glancing toward the village. "Someone might see. Everyone is dealing with storm damage. No one is looking this way." She had her arms crossed, her expression determined. "I am going with you." "What? Fishing?" "I am going with you. You need help pulling nets with that leg of yours, do not deny it, and I am tired of hiding." Kellan wanted to argue, wanted to tell her it was too dangerous, but she was right about his leg. It ached every time he hauled in a full net, especially on days like this when the weather had been rough. And there was something in her face, a desperate need to be useful that he recognized all too well. "All right," he said. "But stay low in the boat when we get close to shore." Her grin was fierce and bright, and it transformed her face entirely. "Deal." They pushed off together, the boat cutting through the still choppy water, and Kellan showed her how he worked his nets. She learned quickly, her strong hands managing the ropes with ease, and together they brought in a haul twice what he usually caught alone. She laughed when a particularly fat fish tried to wriggle free, a sound of pure delight, and Kellan found himself laughing too for the first time in longer than he could remember. On the way back, with the sun warm on their faces and the boat riding low with their catch, Grisha said, "This is good work, honest work." "It is," Kellan agreed. "Boring sometimes, but good. Better than fighting. Much better than fighting." She looked at him curiously. "You were a soldier." "For 8 years. Border campaigns mostly, fighting orcs, defending settlements. I got an arrow in the leg during a skirmish, infected badly. By the time it healed I could not march anymore, so they sent me home." He paused. "I killed orcs. I want you to know that." "I killed humans," Grisha said quietly. "Before I questioned it, before I realized we were just making more orphans and widows on both sides. We are even, I suppose. Maybe we can be more than even. Maybe we can be proof that the war does not have to go on forever." She smiled at that, small and sad and hopeful all at once. Maybe. They sold the catch together, Grisha staying in the boat while Kellan dealt with Marta at the market. The fishmonger was pleased with the size of the haul and paid well, making a comment about how Kellan seemed to be doing better lately. He accepted the compliment with a non-committal grunt and hurried back before anyone got curious about why his boat was sitting so heavy in the water with him already gone. That night, they made a simple dinner together, Grisha cutting vegetables with a knife while Kellan tended a pot of fish stew. It felt domestic and strange and right all at once. They talked while they cooked, small things at first and then deeper subjects. She told him about life in the orc clans, the strict hierarchies and the constant pressure to prove strength. He told her about growing up in Stillmere, about Sarah and their brief marriage, about the loneliness of the years since. "You loved her very much," Grisha observed, watching him over the steam from the pot. "I did. Still do, in a way, but grief is not the same as love. Grief is just the empty space where love used to be. That is a sad thought." "Yes," Kellan agreed, "but true." They ate in comfortable silence, and afterward Grisha insisted on cleaning up while Kellan worked on repairing a fishing rod. The cottage felt alive in a way it had not since Sarah died, filled with the sounds of another person, the presence of someone who was not him. It was both comforting and terrifying. 1 week passed, then another, and Grisha did not leave. They never discussed it explicitly, but each morning she was still there, and each morning Kellan felt a quiet relief. They fell into a routine, fishing together at dawn, maintaining their gear during the day while she stayed inside, and sharing meals in the evening. She told him stories about the orc clans, their customs and their legends, and he found himself fascinated by a culture he had only ever known as an enemy. "We are not so different," he said one evening. "Orcs and humans. We want the same things: safety, purpose, connection." "Tell that to your village," Grisha said with a bitter edge. "Or to my former clan, they would laugh at you. Let them laugh. I know what I see." She looked at him then, really looked at him, and something passed between them that made Kellan's breath catch. It was not the first time he had noticed how striking she was, the strong lines of her face and the intelligence in her eyes, but it was the first time he let himself acknowledge the warmth that spread through his chest when she smiled at him. This was dangerous territory. He was a human, and she was an orc, and the world did not look kindly on such things. But sitting there in the firelight, watching her mend one of his shirts with careful stitches, Kellan found he did not care as much as he should. "What are you thinking?" Grisha asked, catching him staring. "That I am glad you stayed." She set down the shirt, her expression suddenly serious. "Kellan, this cannot last. Eventually someone will see me. Eventually you will be forced to choose between your village and a fugitive orc. I will not let you sacrifice everything for me." "What if I think you are worth it?" The words hung in the air between them, too honest and too raw to take back. Grisha's eyes widened, and for a moment she looked utterly vulnerable, her warrior's composure cracking to reveal the lonely, desperate woman underneath. "You do not mean that," she whispered. "I do." She stood abruptly, turning away from him. "You are lonely. You miss your wife. I am just convenient, someone to fill the silence." Kellan stood too, his bad leg protesting. "You are not convenient. You are stubborn and brave and kind, and you make me laugh for the first time in 4 years. You are not Sarah, and I am not trying to replace her. You are something different, something I did not know I needed." "I am an orc," she said, her voice breaking. "Your people killed my mother. I killed people like you. We have no future. Then we make one. We build something new." She turned back to face him, tears tracking down her green cheeks, and Kellan crossed the space between them without thinking. He cupped her face in his hands, feeling the warmth of her skin, the faint ridges of old scars, and she looked up at him with such desperate hope that it nearly broke his heart. "Grisha," he said softly, "I am not afraid of what you are, I am only afraid of losing this, losing you." "Kellan." He kissed her, gentle and tentative, giving her every chance to pull away. For a heartbeat she was frozen, and then she was kissing him back, her strong arms wrapping around him and pulling him close. She tasted like the ale they had shared and something else, something uniquely her, and Kellan felt like he was waking up from a long sleep. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Grisha rested her forehead against his. "This is foolish," she murmured. "Probably. We will face so much hate, so much resistance. I know. And you still want this, more than I have wanted anything in a very long time." She laughed, shaky and watery, and kissed him again. This time there was no hesitation, no fear, just the two of them choosing each other despite everything the world said they should be. They did not sleep together that night, both too aware of the weight of what was beginning between them to rush it. But they stayed up late talking and holding hands like young lovers. Grisha finally took the bed while Kellan slept by the fire, and when he woke in the morning to find her already up and making breakfast, her hair loose around her shoulders and a soft smile on her face, he felt something settle deep in his soul. This was right. Whatever happened next, this was right. But the world, as it often does, had other plans. It started with a knock on the door 3 days later, mid-morning, when Grisha was supposed to be hidden inside. Kellan was outside mending a basket when he heard it, followed by a familiar voice calling his name. "Kellan, you in there?" "Willem, the old farmer from down the road." Kellan's heart lurched. He hurried to the cottage door and found Willem standing there looking apologetic, and beyond him he could see Grisha frozen in the middle of the room, visible through the open window. Their eyes met, Kellan's and Willem's, and then the old farmer's gaze tracked slowly to the window and the figure inside. His expression went from friendly to confused to horrified in the space of a breath. "Willem," Kellan said quickly, "it is not what you think." But the old man was already backing away, his face pale. "You are harboring an orc in your home. Kellan, what have you done? She is not dangerous. She has been helping me. She is the reason my nets are always mended." "She is an orc." Willem's voice rose, panicked. "They killed my son in the war. They burned farms, and you are—" "What, living with one?" Grisha appeared in the doorway, her expression carefully blank. "I will go," she said quietly. "I will leave now. This is my fault." "No," Kellan said sharply. "You are not going anywhere." Willem was still backing away. "I have to tell the village council. They need to know. We cannot have orcs here. It is not safe. She has been here for weeks and no one has been hurt. She works, she helps, she wants peace. We need to tell the council that." But Willem was already hurrying away, moving faster than Kellan would have thought possible for a man his age. Kellan watched him go with a sinking feeling in his gut. Within the hour, everyone would know. The council would come, probably with armed men, and they would demand Grisha be turned over or driven out. He had known this day might come, but had not let himself think about what he would do when it did. He turned to find Grisha already gathering the few possessions she had, her face set in grim lines. "I will go into the woods. They will not find me there." "And then what? You live like an animal, always hiding, always running." "It is what I have been doing for months. I will manage." "No." Kellan caught her arm, forcing her to look at him. "We face them together. We make them understand." "They will never understand. You saw Willem's face. I am the monster who killed his son. Nothing I say will change that." "Maybe not. But I can tell them what you have done for me. How you have lived peacefully here. They know me. Some of them respect me. It is worth trying." Grisha looked at him with such sadness. "You will lose everything." "I already lost everything once. I survived, but I will not lose you without a fight." She closed her eyes, warring with herself, and then finally nodded. "Together then. But if they try to hurt you, I run. I will not have your blood on my hands. Deal." They did not have to wait long. Within 2 hours, a group of villagers appeared on the road leading to Kellan's cottage. Maybe 15 of them, some carrying tools that could double as weapons. At their head was Conrad, the village headman, a barrel-chested man with a thick beard and a reputation for fairness. Kellan had always respected him, but now he saw the hard set of Conrad's jaw and wondered if that fairness would extend to an orc. Kellan and Grisha stood together in front of the cottage as the group approached. He could feel her tension, the way her muscles were coiled for flight or fight, but she held her ground beside him. Conrad stopped a few paces away, his eyes flicking between them. "Willem tells me you have been harboring an orc, Kellan. I did not want to believe it, but here we are." "Her name is Grisha," Kellan said evenly. "And yes, she has been staying here. She is the one who has been mending my nets." A murmur ran through the crowd. Some looked confused, others angry. A younger man near the back called out, "She is an orc. They killed dozens of us during the war." "The war is over," Kellan said, raising his voice to be heard. "It has been over for 5 years. How long are we going to keep fighting ghosts?" "Until they stop being a threat," someone else yelled. Conrad held up a hand for silence. "Let him speak." Kellan took a breath, choosing his words carefully. Grisha was cast out by her own clan for speaking against raiding human settlements. She wanted peace, and they exiled her for it. She has been living in hiding, moving from place to place, taking nothing from anyone. She fixed my nets because she wanted to do something good, something helpful. In the weeks she has been here, she has hurt no one. She has worked beside me. She has proven herself trustworthy. She is not our enemy." "She is an orc," Conrad said flatly. "That makes her a danger, no matter what she says her intentions are." Grisha spoke then, her voice carrying across the group. "I understand your fear. I do not blame you for hating my kind. We have given you reason enough. But I am one person, trying to find a way to live in a world that does not want me. I am not asking for acceptance. I am only asking for a chance to prove that not all orcs are your enemy." "Prove it how?" Conrad asked. "By hiding in Kellan's cottage, by sneaking around at night." "I hid because I knew you would react exactly as you are now. But yes, I can prove it. Give me work. Let me help the village. I am strong, I can build, I can haul, I can do whatever needs doing. Judge me by my actions, not by my blood." The crowd was uncertain now, some still hostile but others looking thoughtful. Marta the fishmonger stepped forward, her weathered face curious. "You really been mending Kellan's nets?" "Every night they needed it," Grisha confirmed, "and taking nothing for it. He gave me food and shelter." "That was payment enough." Marta looked at Conrad. "My husband was killed by orcs too. I have no love for them, but this one is talking sense. What harm in giving her a chance? If she steps out of line, we run her off if she proves useful." She shrugged. Could be we all benefit. Others began to speak up, some agreeing with Marta, some still opposed. The argument went back and forth, voices rising and falling, and Kellan held his breath waiting for the verdict. Finally, Conrad raised his hand again. "Here is what we will do," he said. "The orc can stay on trial. 1 month. She works for the village, does what we need, causes no trouble. If she makes it through the month without incident, we discuss making it permanent, but any sign of danger, any threat at all, and she is gone. Exiled at minimum. Understood?" It was not what Kellan had hoped for, but it was better than he had feared. He looked at Grisha, saw her barely perceptible nod, and turned back to Conrad. "Understood. Thank you." "Do not thank me yet," Conrad said grimly. "You are vouching for her, Kellan. If something goes wrong, it is on you too." "I accept that." The crowd dispersed slowly, some still muttering but most seeming satisfied with the compromise. When they were finally alone again, Grisha let out a shaky breath. "That was a near thing, too near. But we have our chance. 1 month to show them who you really are. And if they still reject me at the end, then we will figure something else out. Together." She leaned into him, and he wrapped his arm around her shoulders, marveling at how natural it felt. A human and an orc, standing together against a world that wanted to keep them apart. It should have felt wrong or dangerous or impossible. Instead, it just felt like home. The next day, Conrad came by with a list of tasks for Grisha. There was a stone wall that needed repairing on the north edge of the village. Firewood that needed cutting and splitting for the elderly widow 2 houses down, and a barn roof that had been damaged in the storm weeks ago and still needed patching. All hard physical labor, Kellan noted, the kind that would either prove her stamina or break her. Grisha took the list without complaint and set to work. Kellan wanted to help, but she insisted he continue fishing so they would have income. "This is my test," she said. "I need to pass it on my own." So he fished, though he hated leaving her to face the villagers' scrutiny alone. When he returned each day, he would find her deep in whatever task she had been assigned, her green skin dusty or mud splattered, her muscles standing out as she lifted stones or swung an axe. Some villagers watched her with open suspicion, but others seemed cautiously impressed by how hard she worked without complaint. A week into the trial period, Kellan was selling his catch when a young woman approached him. Her name was Alina, and she had lost her husband in the war. She looked nervous but determined. "Your orc," she said without preamble. "Grisha. She fixed my fence yesterday, noticed it was falling down while she was passing and just fixed it. Did not ask for anything, did not expect thanks, just fixed it and moved on." Kellan felt warmth spread through his chest. "That sounds like her." "I wanted to hate her," Alina said quietly. "I tried to, but she has kind eyes, and my husband would not want me to carry hatred forever. Tell her thank you." "Tell her yourself," Kellan suggested gently. "I think she would like to hear it." Alina looked uncertain but nodded. It was a small thing, but small things had a way of growing. More incidents followed. Grisha helped pull a child out of a thorny bush where he had gotten stuck, suffering deep scratches on her own arms in the process. She taught Marta's grandson how to tie better fishing knots. She sat with Willem during a rainstorm when his arthritis was acting up and listened while he told stories about his dead son, not defending herself or making excuses, just listening with patient sympathy. Slowly, impossibly, the village began to soften toward her. Not everyone. There were still those who glared at her, who muttered about contamination and danger, who insisted the trial month should end with her expulsion. But they were a minority now, outnumbered by those who had seen Grisha work herself to exhaustion helping their community, who had experienced her quiet kindness, who were willing to admit that maybe, just maybe, they had been wrong about what an orc could be. Kellan watched it happen with a mixture of pride and relief. At night, when Grisha dragged herself back to the cottage, he would draw water for her to wash with and make sure she ate enough. She was always exhausted, her hands blistered and her muscles aching, but there was a light in her eyes that had not been there before. "They are starting to accept me," she said one evening, wonder in her voice. "Some of them anyway. I never thought. You are proving what I always knew. That you are extraordinary." She blushed, a darker green spreading across her cheeks. "I am just trying to survive. You are doing more than that. You are changing minds, building bridges. Do you know how rare that is?" "It is exhausting," she admitted. "Always being watched, always having to prove myself. But it is worth it. To have a place, even a tentative one, to have you." They had been careful about showing affection publicly, knowing it would only make things harder, but in the privacy of the cottage they were growing closer every day. Kellan had kissed her many more times since that first night, each one feeling like a small rebellion against a world determined to keep them apart. They shared the bed now, holding each other through the night, finding comfort in simple proximity. It was on one of these nights, with Grisha's head resting on his chest and the fire burning low, that Kellan asked the question that had been building in his mind for weeks. "What happens when the month is up?" She was quiet for a long moment. "I do not know. If they let me stay, I stay. If they do not, I suppose I keep moving, try to find another place that might be more welcoming." "What if you stayed here regardless? Not in the village if they will not have you, but close. We could build something on the outskirts. I could fish, you could trade crafts, we would make it work. You would give up your place in the village for me. I would give up a lot more than that." She lifted her head to look at him, her amber eyes searching his face. "Why? I am still trying to understand why you care so much." "Because I love you," Kellan said simply. "I did not plan to. I did not even want to, if I am being honest. But here we are, and I love you, and I cannot imagine going back to how things were before you." Grisha's breath caught. "Kellan, you do not have to say it back. I just needed you to know." But she was already kissing him, fierce and desperate and tender all at once, and when she pulled back there were tears on her face again. "I love you too. I have loved you since you offered me shelter without asking anything in return. I love you, and it terrifies me because I have already lost so much. I cannot lose you too." "You will not," he promised, knowing he could not truly guarantee it but meaning it with every fiber of his being. "We will figure this out. Whatever happens, we face it together." The month drew to a close, and Conrad called a village meeting to decide Grisha's fate. Everyone gathered in the town square on a cool evening, forming a rough circle around where Conrad stood with Kellan and Grisha. The mood was tense but not hostile, which Kellan took as a good sign. Conrad cleared his throat. "We agreed to a month's trial for the orc, Grisha. That month is up. I have spoken to many of you about your experiences with her. Some good, some neutral, none bad that I have heard. But the decision is not mine alone to make. This is our village, and we all have to live with whatever we decide. So speak your minds. Should she stay or should she go?" Silence for a moment, then Marta stepped forward. "She should stay. My grandson thinks the world of her, and she has done nothing but help us. I say we make her a full member of the community." Willem spoke next, his voice rough. "I hated orcs for years, still do most of them, but Grisha listened when I talked about my boy, did not make excuses or try to justify what happened, just listened like my grief mattered. That is worth something. She can stay, far as I am concerned." Alina raised her hand. "She should stay, and we should stop calling her the orc. Her name is Grisha." One by one, villagers spoke up, most in favor of allowing Grisha to remain. There were a few dissenting voices, people who could not let go of their fear and hatred, but they were outnumbered. When the last person had spoken, Conrad turned to Grisha. "You have heard the verdict. The majority want you to stay as a working member of Stillmere. You will be expected to contribute like everyone else, and you will be held to the same standards. Do you accept these terms?" Grisha's voice was steady despite the emotion in her eyes. "I do. Thank you, all of you. You have given me something I thought I would never have again. A home." There was scattered applause, and a few people even smiled. It was not a perfect victory, and there would still be challenges ahead, but it was a beginning. A real, genuine beginning. As the crowd dispersed, Kellan took Grisha's hand openly for the first time, and she squeezed back hard enough to hurt. They walked back to the cottage together, not speaking, both too overwhelmed by what had just happened. Inside, with the door closed behind them, Grisha finally let herself break down. She sobbed into Kellan's shoulder while he held her, murmuring reassurances, and he felt his own eyes stinging with tears. They had done it. Against all odds, against history and prejudice and fear, they had carved out a place for themselves. The seasons turned, and life settled into a new rhythm. Grisha took on more responsibilities in the village, using her strength for heavy labor and her steady hands for delicate repairs. She was never fully one of them, not in the way someone born and raised in Stillmere would be, but she was accepted, respected even. Children waved to her in the streets, and the elderly asked her for help with tasks their bodies could no longer manage. Kellan and Grisha made no secret of their relationship, and while some muttered about it behind their backs, no one confronted them directly. They were simply Kellan and Grisha, the fisherman and the orc woman together. It became a familiar sight, the two of them walking hand in hand down to the docks in the pre-dawn light, or working side by side in their expanding garden, or sitting on the cottage steps in the evening watching the sun set over the bay. 8 months after the village meeting, on a crisp autumn morning when the leaves were turning gold and red, Kellan asked Grisha to marry him. They were out on the boat, checking nets, when he said it. "Grisha, will you be my wife?" She nearly dropped the rope she was holding. "What? Will you marry me? I know it is complicated. I know a lot of people will have opinions about it, but I do not care. I want everyone to know that you are mine and I am yours, officially and forever." Grisha stared at him, her mouth slightly open, and then a slow smile spread across her face. "You are serious, completely serious. We cannot have a traditional wedding. No priest will agree to marry a human and an orc. Then we will have an untraditional wedding. We will make our own vows in front of the village, and anyone who objects can keep it to themselves." She laughed, bright and joyous, and launched herself at him hard enough to rock the boat. "Yes, yes, of course, yes, you ridiculous, wonderful man." They kissed there in the swaying boat, surrounded by nets and fish and the smell of the sea, and Kellan felt happier than he had in his entire life. Sarah had been his first love, sweet and gentle, but Grisha was his second chance, fierce and strong, and he loved her with a depth that still surprised him. The wedding took place a month later, on a mild day in late autumn when the world seemed suspended between seasons. They held it in the village square, and almost everyone turned out to watch. Conrad, who had grown fond of Grisha despite his initial reservations, agreed to officiate in the absence of a priest willing to do the honors. Kellan wore his best clothes, a dark wool jacket that had belonged to his father, and Grisha wore a dress that Alina and several other village women had sewn for her, green to match her skin and embroidered with small white flowers. She looked beautiful and nervous, and Kellan could not stop smiling. Conrad kept the ceremony simple. "We are gathered here to witness the union of Kellan Foster and Grisha of the Ironhide clan. They come from different worlds, but they have chosen to build a new one together. If anyone has objection to this union, speak now." A few uncomfortable glances were exchanged, but no one spoke. Conrad nodded, satisfied. Kellan, you take Grisha as your wife, to stand beside her in good times and bad, to honor her and care for her all the days of your life. I do, Kellan said firmly. Grisha, do you take Kellan as your husband to stand beside him in good times and bad, to honor him and care for him all the days of your life? I do, Grisha said, her voice thick with emotion. Then by the authority vested in me by this community, I declare you married. Kellan, you may kiss your wife. And he did, to scattered applause and a few whoops from the younger villagers. When they broke apart, both grinning like fools, Marta thrust a bouquet of late-season wildflowers into Grisha's hands and Willem clapped Kellan hard on the back. You are a lucky man, the old farmer said gruffly. She is a good one. I know, Kellan said. I know. The celebration that followed was modest but warm. There was food and drink, music from a young man with a fiddle, and dancing that lasted into the night. Grisha was pulled into several dances by villagers who wanted to congratulate her, and Kellan watched with a full heart as she laughed and spun, fully alive and fully free for perhaps the first time since her exile. Later, when they finally escaped back to their cottage, Grisha turned to him with tears streaming down her face. I never thought I would have this. A home. A family. You deserve all of it and more, Kellan said, pulling her close. You are the bravest person I have ever met. I am only brave because you made me feel safe enough to be. They made love for the first time that night, slow and tender, learning each other with careful hands and whispered endearments. Afterward, tangled together in the bed they now officially shared, Grisha traced patterns on Kellan's chest and said, I want to write to my clan, tell them what I have found here. Will they care? Probably not, but I want them to know that there is another way. That peace is possible if both sides are willing to try. Then write to them, Kellan encouraged. Plant seeds. You never know what might grow. She did write, a long letter detailing her exile, her time in Stillmere, and her marriage to a human. She sent it with a traveling merchant who promised to deliver it to the Ironhide clan's territory. No response came, but Grisha did not seem surprised or particularly hurt. She had made peace with her past, and her future was here now, with Kellan and the village that had learned to accept her. Winter came, harsh and cold, and Kellan and Grisha spent long evenings by the fire, planning improvements to the cottage and dreaming about the spring. They talked about expanding the garden, maybe getting a goat for milk, teaching some of the village children how to fish properly. Small dreams, domestic dreams, but precious for their simplicity. On the coldest night of the year, when snow was piled high outside and the wind howled around the cottage, Grisha told Kellan she thought she might be pregnant. He nearly dropped the cup of tea he was holding. You think? I am not certain, but I am late and I have been feeling strange, sick in the mornings. It could be something else, but it could be a child. Yes. They stared at each other, the enormity of it settling over them. A child, half human and half orc, in a world that barely tolerated their union. It would be a target for prejudice from both sides, a living symbol of everything people feared about mixing the races. It would also be theirs, and Kellan found he wanted it with a fierce intensity that surprised him. If you are pregnant, he said slowly, then we will have a child. And we will love that child and protect them and teach them to be strong like their mother and stubborn like their father. And anyone who has a problem with it can answer to me. Grisha laughed, shaky and relieved. You are not worried, I am terrified, but also excited, also hopeful. Is that strange? No, she said, moving to sit in his lap, her arms around his neck. That is exactly right. The midwife confirmed it a few weeks later. Grisha was indeed pregnant, maybe 2 months along. The news spread through the village quickly. reactions ranging from genuine congratulations to barely concealed disgust. But Kellan and Grisha faced it together, their united front brooking no argument. Marta, bless her, became an unexpected champion. "A baby is a baby," she declared to anyone who would listen. "Orc, human, or both. We should be celebrating new life, not complaining about whose blood it carries." Elena agreed, and between the two of them they organized a celebration of sorts, a gathering at the cottage where village women brought small gifts and advice. Grisha was overwhelmed by the kindness, having expected rejection instead, and Kellan watched with pride as she navigated the social complexities with grace. Not everyone was supportive, of course. There were whispers about what the child might be like, fears about it being violent or uncontrollable, suggestions that it should be sent away as soon as it was born. Kellan heard these rumors and felt rage boil in his chest, but Grisha urged him to let them go. "They are afraid because they do not understand," she said. "We will show them. When the baby comes, healthy and normal, they will see there is nothing to fear." Spring arrived with a rush of warmth and growth, and Grisha's belly grew round and prominent. She could no longer help with the heavier village work, but she took up sewing and mending instead, crafting tiny clothes for the baby with careful stitches. Kellan caught her smiling at the little garments sometimes, a look of such tender hope on her face that it made his chest ache. They turned the small storage room in the cottage into a nursery of sorts, painting the walls with flowers and birds that Grisha insisted on doing herself. Kellan made a cradle from driftwood, sanding it smooth and rubbing it with oil until it gleamed. They were nesting, preparing for a future neither of them had dared dream of a year ago. The baby came on a warm night in early summer, when fireflies were dancing in the garden and the air smelled of growing things. The midwife attended, along with Marta and Elena, and Kellan paced outside the cottage trying not to panic at every sound from within. It seemed to take forever, though later the midwife would tell him it was actually quite fast for a first birth. Finally, after what felt like hours, the door opened and Elena emerged with a smile. "You have a daughter. Both mother and child are healthy." Kellan stumbled inside, his heart in his throat, and found Grisha propped up in bed looking exhausted but radiant. In her arms was a tiny bundle, and when she pulled back the cloth, he saw his daughter's face for the first time. She was beautiful. Her skin was a lighter shade of green than Grisha's, almost olive, and she had delicate pointed ears and a tiny button nose. Her eyes, when they opened, were a striking amber green, and she had a thatch of dark hair already. Small tusks were barely visible along her lower gums. She was clearly not fully human, but not fully orc either. She was something new, something uniquely herself. "She is perfect," Kellan whispered, sitting carefully on the edge of the bed. "She is," Grisha agreed, tears streaming down her face. "Our perfect girl. What should we name her?" They had discussed names for months without settling on anything, but now, looking at their daughter's serious little face, Grisha said, "Kira. It means light in the old Orcish tongue. Kira Foster." "Kira," Kellan repeated, testing it. "I love it." He held his daughter for the first time, marveling at how small she was, how fragile, and swore silently that he would protect her from every threat, fight every battle necessary to keep her safe. She was his and Grisha's, the living proof that love could bridge any divide. The village's reaction to Kira was mixed, but gradually warming. The children were particularly fascinated by her, wanting to see the baby who was both human and orc. Adults were more reserved, but even the most prejudiced found it hard to maintain their hostility in the face of an innocent infant. Kira was sweet-tempered and rarely cried, and as the weeks passed, she became a fixture in village life, carried in a sling against Grisha's chest as she went about her daily tasks. "She is adorable," one woman admitted grudgingly to Kellan at the market. "I did not think. Well, she is adorable." "She is," Kellan agreed, unable to hide his pride. Months became a year, and Kira grew from a tiny infant into a curious toddler with her mother's strength and her father's stubborn determination. She learned to walk early, pulling herself up on furniture and stumbling around the cottage with fierce concentration. She learned words in both human common tongue and the Orcish language Grisha taught her, becoming effortlessly bilingual. The village watched her grow, and slowly but surely, their fears faded. She was just a child, bright and friendly and charming in the way all toddlers could be. She would bring wildflowers to neighbors, squeal with delight at the fishing boats, and fall asleep in the middle of playing, exhausted by her own boundless energy. On Kira's second birthday, the village threw a party in the square, a real celebration with music and food and gifts. It was a far cry from the suspicion and hostility that had greeted Grisha's arrival, and as Kellan watched his daughter toddle around accepting hugs and treats from villagers who had once wanted her mother driven out, he felt a sense of completion. They had done it. They had built something impossible and made it real. That night, after Kira was asleep in her cradle and the cottage was quiet, Grisha pulled Kellan outside to look at the stars. They sat on the cottage steps, her head on his shoulder, his arm around her waist. "I never thought I would be this happy," Grisha said softly. "When my clan cast me out, I thought my life was over. I thought I would die alone and forgotten. Instead, you found a terrible fisherman with a bad leg and a lonely heart." "I found everything," she corrected. "A home, a purpose, love. A family. You gave me all of that." "We gave it to each other," Kellan said. "I was just as lost before you, just as alone. Do you ever regret it? The complications we have faced, the judgment? Never. Not once. You and Kira are the best things that ever happened to me." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars wheel overhead, and Kellan thought about the journey that had brought them here. A torn net, a hidden figure under a dock, a choice to offer kindness instead of fear. It had seemed like such a small thing at the time, but it had changed everything. Years continued to pass, each one bringing new joys and challenges. Kira grew into a strong, intelligent girl who had her mother's courage and her father's sense of justice. The village accepted her fully, and she became a bridge between human and orc in ways her parents could never have anticipated. When other orc exiles heard about Stillmere through the traveling merchant network, some came seeking the same acceptance Grisha had found, and the village, having learned its lesson, gave them a chance. Not all stayed, and not all situations ended well, but enough did that Stillmere gained a reputation as a place where different peoples could coexist peacefully. Kellan and Grisha became unlikely ambassadors, their marriage and family proof that the old hatreds did not have to define the future. When Kira was 10, a delegation arrived from the Ironhide clan. They were led by a weathered orc warrior who introduced himself as Grisha's brother, Thak. He had traveled for weeks to find her after hearing rumors of an orc woman living among humans. The reunion was emotional and complicated. Thak was wary of Kellan and suspicious of the village, but he softened when he met Kira, his niece, who greeted him with the unself-conscious warmth of a child who had never learned to fear orcs. Over several days of careful conversation, Grisha learned that her old clan chief had died, and the new leadership was more open to peace with humans. Thak had come to ask if she would consider returning, or at least opening trade talks between the clan and Stillmere. It was Kellan who encouraged her to do it. "This is what you wanted, is it not? For both sides to come together." But it would mean traveling back to the clan lands, being away from you and Kira for weeks, maybe months. We will be here when you return, and this is important. You could help negotiate a real peace, something lasting. So Grisha went, accompanied by Conrad and several other village representatives, and spent 3 months in delicate negotiations with the Ironhide clan. It was difficult work, full of setbacks and old resentments, but eventually they reached an agreement. Trade between Stillmere and the clan, exchanges of goods and knowledge, and a mutual defense pact in case of outside threats. When Grisha returned, thinner and exhausted but triumphant, the whole village turned out to welcome her home. Kira ran to her mother and wrapped her arms around her waist, and Grisha held her daughter like she might never let go. That night, back in their cottage with Kira asleep in the next room, Grisha told Kellan about everything she had seen and done. "It is just a beginning," she said. "There is still so much mistrust, so much history to overcome, but it is a start." "Because of you," Kellan said. "Because you were brave enough to speak up, even when it cost you everything. Because you were kind enough to take in a stranger," Grisha countered. "Because you chose to see past what I was to who I could be." They were both right, and they both knew it. Their love had been the seed, but it had taken a whole village and eventually a whole clan to nurture it into something that could change the world. More years passed. Kira grew into a young woman who would eventually become a mediator between human and orc communities, carrying on her parents' work. Other mixed-heritage children were born in Stillmere and in the orc clans that had opened to the idea, each one a small rebellion against the old ways, each one proof that a different future was possible. Kellan and Grisha grew old together, their hair going gray and their bodies slowing, but their love as strong as ever. They would sit on their cottage steps on warm summer evenings, watching the fireflies and holding hands, and talk about the early days when everything had seemed so impossible. "Do you remember when I hid under your dock?" Grisha would ask, and Kellan would laugh. "How could I forget? You terrified me." "I was terrified too. I never expected you to be kind. Best decision I ever made, being kind to a strange orc woman. Best decision I ever made, trusting a lonely fisherman." And they would sit in comfortable silence, two people from different worlds who had built a bridge between them and invited others to cross. It had not been easy and it had not always been safe, but it had been worth every struggle, every risk, every moment of doubt. On Kellan's 70th birthday, Grisha gave him a gift, a perfectly mended fishing net, the same style as the one she had repaired all those years ago. He held it in his weathered hands and felt tears prick his eyes. "I still remember finding them mended every morning," he said quietly. "Not knowing who or why, just finding kindness where I expected none." "I remember being too afraid to show myself," Grisha replied, her own eyes wet. "Watching you from the shadows and wishing I could speak. And then you offered me shelter and everything changed." "Everything changed," Kellan agreed. They were surrounded by family that day. Kira and her own children, friends from the village and visitors from the orc clans, all gathered to celebrate and share in the joy of two people who had dared to love across every boundary. It was loud and chaotic and perfect, and as Kellan looked around at the life he and Grisha had built, he felt a profound sense of peace. He had been a soldier once, and then a lonely fisherman, and then a man who chose kindness over fear. That choice had brought him everything: love, family, purpose, hope. It had turned his small corner of the world from a place of suspicion and old hatred into something new and bright. And it had all started with torn nets mended in the night and an orc woman who finally found the courage to speak. As the sun set over Stillmere Bay, painting the water in shades of gold and orange, Kellan Foster took his wife's hand and squeezed it gently. She squeezed back, and in that simple gesture was a lifetime of love and trust and gratitude. They had built something impossible together, and it had been worth every moment. The fire crackled in the cottage behind them, voices rose in laughter and song, and the world spun on, a little brighter and a little kinder for their presence in it. The old fisherman and his orc wife had changed the tides of history with nothing more than patience, courage, and a willingness to see each other as fully human, fully real, fully deserving of love. And they lived, happily and completely, surrounded by the family and community they had created, until their final days came gently and without regret, knowing they had left the world better than they found it. Their story became legend in Stillmere and beyond, told to children as an example of how love could triumph over hatred, how kindness could transform fear, how two people from opposite sides of an old war could build a bridge strong enough for others to follow. The cottage by the bay remained standing for generations, maintained by their descendants, a monument to the impossible made possible. And every spring, when the fishing season began anew, people would stand at the old dock where Grisha had once hidden in shame and fear, and they would remember the fisherman who chose mercy and the orc woman who chose hope, and they would cast their nets into the water with gratitude for the legacy of peace that had been so carefully, lovingly built.